Welcome to the Great Commission Today podcast, a podcast designed to help you and your church become more faithful, confident, and purposeful in obedience to the Great Commission. The Great Commission Today is sponsored by 5 More Talents, an agency that offers holistic digital outreach solutions to help churches leverage technology wisely to invite more visitors, engage more members, and develop more leaders in this digital age.
All right, well, Pastor Jerry Riendeau, hopefully I pronounced your name correctly.
That'll work.
Okay, glad to have you on the podcast. So this is part of season 2 of the podcast, Great Commission Today. And the theme of this season is kind of shaping up to be how God built this, stories of making disciples in local churches. And Jerry, as I was mentioning to you, one of my growing convictions is to unpack, when Jesus says in Matthew 28, all authority has been given to him in heaven and on earth, that really does encompass all of everything. It encompasses the spiritual things, the things that we think of as very spiritual, and the things that we might consider very mundane. So I'm excited to hear about Grace PCA in Dearborn, Michigan, and how God has built the church thus far, and some of the components of that. So I guess to get started, tell us a little bit about Grace Church, where you're located, how long it's been around, and what's your role there.
Yeah. Well, thanks for having me, Daniel. I really appreciate it. It's a joy to be able to talk about these topics with you. So Grace Presbyterian, we're in Dearborn, Michigan. We began, my wife and I, our family, we got 3 kids. Well, we had 3 kids when we moved here. We just had a 4th this past week. We moved here about 4 years ago, and we began early church planting things like leading Bible studies, doing evangelism, networking in the city about 4 years ago. And then 2 years ago, January of 2024, we began weekly public worship. So we're about 2 years into that. Dearborn, Michigan, if you're not super familiar with it, well, I know you are familiar with it, Daniel, being that your parents live there. It is famous for a few reasons. It's famous for being the home of Henry Ford, both the individual and now the company. And it's famous for being kind of known as the Arab capital of North America. Something like 50 to 55% of the population are Arabic speakers, either first generation or second generation immigrants. And so those are some of what it's known for. I think that answers your first question there.
Yeah, and you're the pastor of the church.
Yes, and I serve as the church planting pastor.
Yeah, great. So that sounds like the church is about 4 years along in its journey at this point. So before we kind of unpack kind of some of the different aspects of how the Lord has built the church thus far, what is there anything that stands out to you that just shows, God's hand of grace and mercy and just getting the church to this point so far?
Yeah, church planting is statistically doesn't work, right? When you start a church, it the odds are you will be closing the doors in the next couple of years at some point. And honestly, the biggest grace is that we haven't had to do that yet. And in fact, God continues to grow the church and build it. When we moved to Dearborn, we'd done a lot of research, but I didn't realize quite how many churches had closed here in Dearborn before we got here. Dearborn's a medium-sized city, about 110,000 people live here. But in the 2 or 3 years before we moved in, there were I think 4 evangelical churches had closed in the city, and then in addition to that, some mainline churches and Catholic churches. And I remember as I kind of got the picture, I thought, if this works, This is going to be because God decided he wanted to make this work. And so here we are, and the church is still going. We're seeing some growth, and we've seen people trust Jesus this year and baptize folks. And so I think just the fact that we're still here is grace right now for us.
Yeah, that's great. So, yeah, just to start to unpack some of the different components of that, we know that the Lord has promised to bless the preaching of the word and the administration of the sacraments and prayer. And so, what has that looked like in the planting of Grace Church so far?
Yeah.
Ordinary means of grace.
Yeah, I mean, our church what we do is very, very, very simple. Every week we gather on Sunday morning for Sunday morning Lord's Day worship. Our service is about an hour and a half long, and we follow the same liturgy every Sunday. That includes confession of sin, affirmation of faith. We preach the word as we kind of work through books of the Bible sequentially, and then we do communion every week, and that's been one of our commitments. I'm before we started Grace, I was in college ministry. I wasn't a pastor yet. And I thought that what I was really going to love about being a pastor was preaching. And I do really love preaching. But I would say my favorite thing to do right now as a pastor is the Lord's Supper each week. We didn't plan it this way. But Lord's Supper has become if I were thinking ahead, I would have thought I want Lord's Supper to be, since we do every week, not quite as big of a piece of the worship service as it ended up being at our church. We were really small when we started. We're still not big, but we had every person come to the front. I prayed for every kid, and I individually served along with another officer, everyone bread and wine, and we because there were only like 25 of us at first, it worked. But as we've grown and we're up to about maybe 80 to 90 in a Sunday morning, we got to a point where it takes forever. We pray for each kid individually. And I started saying to the congregation, I guess we're going to have to split into two lines. And the response from the congregation was, no, that's not what we're going to do. This is our favorite part of the worship service. Your preaching's okay, Jerry, but we love all taking part in this together in this line. And interestingly, I thought visitors would have a problem with it because it just makes the service longer than it would otherwise be. But whenever a visitor comes, I have a chance to ask them what they thought of the service. They always point to the Lord's Supper as a highlight. Just seeing kind of the family take part in a meal there. So that's been a big way we've seen kind of God's ordinary means play a big role in our church. The other is the thing we've been doing the longest as a church is gathering on Tuesday evenings for dinner and Bible study. We started doing that. We moved to Dearborn in June, and we started gathering for dinner and Bible study in August. And it was in our home. And in a lot of ways, the church sort of grew out of that weekly routine. Eventually we outgrew our house, and we didn't have our own building yet. So we found another local church let us use some of their space for our Tuesday evening thing. And then we moved into our current building that we're in. And we started doing it in our fellowship hall. And it's just grown and grown. We're up to about 50 or so folks who gather each week for this. And I'll be honest, when I'm not thinking spiritually, I stop and I kind of wonder, why are people coming to this? All we do is it's a potluck, so we bring our own food, we eat together, and then either myself or someone else stands up and just leads a Bible study for 30, 40 minutes, and then we pray together. There's no program, there's nothing special, but it's everyone's favorite thing that we do. And I've talked to the congregation about, because this wasn't ever supposed to be a big thing, about, it's probably time that we divide up into small groups and meet at different times of the week. And the congregation kind of rebelled against that and said, no, this is what we do. We get together and we read the Bible together and we study it and we eat together. So I don't know. That's sort of how we've seen God work faithfully through very simple means.
Yeah, that's great to hear that. And yeah, having joined you at least once for those
Oh yeah.
Tuesday, yeah, that was really great.
Where
So,
were we, Daniel, when were we in the new building then when you came?
no, that was at some other church building in
Oh
town
yeah,
that
the
you're
other
meeting
church
in.
let us use their space.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So that's great to hear just uh, how the simple things are being used by the Lord.
Amen.
So now, are you all at the point where now in the growth of the church where you have officers and elders and deacons and so forth, or is that kind of still yet to come?
Yeah, our officers are sort of borrowed officers right now from other congregations who are overseeing our work while we get ready to particularize to become our own independent church. But we are now officially in the process of beginning training individuals who might end up being nominated and elected to be elders and deacons in the future. And that process of training will probably last about 4 or 5 months. And then, the men who come through that who we feel and they feel might be qualified leaders would be there would be an opportunity for the congregation to nominate and elect at that point. We're hoping, God willing, to move toward the particularization process in the next year and a half.
Great. And, Ephesians 4 stands out to me about how, God through the Holy Spirit gives people different spiritual gifts for equipping the saints for the work of ministry. And so like, what do you see as the importance of having qualified leaders in place? What has that meant thus far? And what's the importance of that going forward as well?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, incredibly important. I think that's one of the hardest things about trying to be a Presbyterian church plant. It's in our name. We believe in being led by presbyters, elders in the church. But sort of by definition, a new church plant isn't going to be able to have that because we don't have a congregation yet. We haven't raised up leaders yet. And so we've been led and overseen by wonderful men, both elders and pastors from our denomination from around the state, who I meet with regularly over Zoom, and they do a lot of the work that the elders would do in a local church. They approve the budget, they keep me accountable, all those things, but they're not here locally. And so they really aren't able to participate in caring for the souls of individuals other than through prayer and other really important ways. One of the big blessings our church plant has experienced is we have two guys who were serving as officers in other wonderful churches before arriving. One of them is of course your dad, who joined us I guess about 6 months ago now, maybe a little longer, and that's been a huge blessing. And then another gentleman who's an elder at one of our sister churches here in the area who decided to be part of the plant. It's hard for me to imagine what things would have looked like if those two guys weren't around. The Lord could help us muddle through any situation, but I'll tell you what, I am very much looking forward to having the elders of the church be the men who are present in the church.
Very good. So yeah, I'm just thinking back to the church I'm a part of started as a church plant, and I'm just kind of thinking of some of the early days. It was really exciting for me to see kind of some of the people that kind of came to the church plant, because there was a lot of, I don't know why they came, but they came, and some of them had some really amazing stories of how the Lord had worked in their life through to connect them with the church plant. And there was just kind of new things happening. That was really exciting. So I'm curious if there's anything like that you've seen that has been helpful, that we can praise the Lord for for his mercy and grace to the church in that way.
So ways that God has connected folks to our church.
Yeah, testimonies or like
Yeah.
people being converted, you mentioned that maybe some people being baptized.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just kind of curious.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, the first person after we moved here who told me that he was going to be part of our church was a man named Ken. And Ken lives in my street. He's, I think he's around. He's a little older. He grew up in he grew up in the special the special eds program in his high school, and he's lived in the same house his whole life. His parents passed away. He inherited the house, and he's just a beloved guy in the neighborhood. But we met him pretty early on, and when he found out I was a pastor, he told me, "Jerry, I'm going to be a part of your church." And he was true to his word. He came to everything from that point forward. And when we took our first members, he was the first person we baptized, and the first member of the church, because the other people joined after he was baptized. So for a brief time, Ken was the church member during that service. But while we were interviewing him for membership, Lauren, one of the other men in the church, who was an elder in a different church, asked Ken, you seem so excited about being part of the church and about Jesus. Why have you never joined a church before? And his answer was just, no one's ever offered to take me. He can't drive, and he's limited of how much he can walk. It was this realization: if we hadn't moved to Dearborn with the purpose of planting a church to reach this particular neighborhood, who would have ever invited Ken to church? And obviously God will do what he wants to do. He could have raised up a stone to bring Ken to church, but that was just a very, very cool moment. The second person who told me that he was going to be a part of our church was a young man named Nathan. I met Nathan when he was a freshman at the University of Michigan at Dearborn. And I was on campus trying to lead a Bible study, and I was walking around the library asking folks if they wanted to come be a part of our Bible study. And I asked Nathan, and Nathan said, maybe, I'm not sure. And I walked away. And later on, when we talked about this, he said, when he told me maybe, he knew that meant no. He had no intention of being coming over to be part of the Bible study. But then his laptop died, and he couldn't finish studying. And so he's like, well, I guess I have nothing else to do. And he came over and joined the Bible study. Nathan had grown up in a different. He's part of an immigrant community here in the Metro Detroit area, and he grew up in a church, but he grew up in a church that spoke their home country's language. And he had never, even though he spent his whole life in church, he never heard a sermon in his home language, in his native language, because they're always in the language from the immigrant community. And he didn't speak that language. He spoke English. And so he visited Grace, and it was the first time he'd heard an English sermon. He, very short time later, joined the church, and actually I'm doing premarital counseling with him now. He's getting ready to get married. So those are two kind of the fun stories.
Yeah, that's great.
We've seen God bring unlikely folks to church.
Yeah, that's wonderful. So, I know that, Dearborn is a very unique community. And so, as I study the scriptures, in particular the book of Acts, there's some interesting stories about the relationships of the local churches with kind of the local community and the local government officials. So I'm just kind of curious, kind of what that has looked like for the church thus far.
Yeah, great question. That's one of the most common questions I get, I think, as a pastor in Dearborn from my peers from other communities. I think there is an assumption that because the city is predominantly Muslim, that there would be some hostility toward the Christian faith. I will say that that's really not been the case for us. One thing I I've said to folks is no matter where you live, most of your neighbors probably aren't going to be followers of Jesus, right? And I come from a community, I come from college towns. And in those towns, my neighbors who weren't followers of Jesus tend to be secular humanists, right? Here they tend to be Muslims. And honestly, in many ways, it's easier to raise a family in this community because of some shared values, um, including shared values of fearing God. Um, and so honestly, it's been less challenging than I think most people would think. Like, let me just one example: the building we're worshiping in now is actually owned by two Muslim businessmen who rent us the building and have come to some of our worship services and are just really excellent landlords. But I made it a point to try to engage as much as possible in the community. Just one example of that is I got really involved in the Chamber of Commerce pretty early on. And so we actually hosted just this morning a Chamber of Commerce event at the church. And so we had business leaders, politicians, nonprofit leaders, folks from the school at the church building this morning for a meeting, which was really, really cool. I got a chance to talk to him a little bit about the vision of our church. And by the time I left the meeting, and now this is years and years of building friendships with these folks. I invited everyone to come to my son's baptism, which is going to be next Sunday. And 6 folks told me they were going to come before I left. So that's just been a really fun way of engaging the community. And the other thing I'll say is I've also gotten really involved in our neighborhood association. I'm serving on the board of the association now as the vice president, and that's been really fun because it gives me a platform other than being a pastor in the community. And so when I meet with folks in the community, I can also put on the neighborhood association hat and kind of interact with people in different ways, and it kind of opens up some avenues. So that's a couple of the ways that I've gotten involved in the city.
Hey there, I'm Daniel Vos, co-founder and CEO of Five More Talents, and I wanted to take a moment to thank you for listening to the Great Commission Today podcast. I pray that each and every episode, including today's, blesses you and equips you and helps you to feel more confident, more purposeful, and to be more faithful in making disciples of all nations wherever the Lord has placed you. I also wanted to offer a special invitation to you if you're a church leader. If you're a church leader and you have the opportunity to use online outreach at your church and you're a decision maker in that role, and you sense that your church is just not grasping all the opportunities that you could to make more disciples and invite more visitors using the online media, then I'd love to talk with you. You can book a free 30-minute meeting with me called an Outreach Discovery Call. In that meeting, we'll talk about what you've been doing and begin to explore some of the additional possibilities that are out there for you. So that sounds like that would be helpful to you. Just go to go.fivemoretalents.com and fill out the form there. Now back to the interview. And you mentioned the building. I know that's kind of a newer development and exciting development. So tell us about the building and kind of the role that that's playing in how God has built the church thus far, and what it means for you right now, and what you think it might mean for the future.
Totally. Yeah. So when we when we were getting ready to start public worship, I had just a really hard time finding a place for us to worship. Our budget at the time was, a shoestring. And if we wanted to use the public schools, they were very excited about having us, but it would have cost minimum of like maybe $1,200, $1,500 a week in the building and a school. And that's not because the schools didn't want us there. It's because of union wages, those kind of things. It was really challenging, and I was committed to us worshiping on Sunday mornings rather than finding a church we could worship on Sunday afternoons. And so we ended up at a Chamber of Commerce meeting. I met the owner of a local funeral home, and we ended up worshiping in a funeral home chapel for. I thought it was going to be like 3 months. It ended up being almost 2 years, like 18 months. And that was interesting. Now there were some advantages. One advantage is that it was cheap, and they were wonderful hosts. The other advantage is that the only people who would consider coming to church in a funeral home were either folks who we built really good relationships with, who trusted us, or really missionally minded Christians that liked the idea of a church plant and wanted to see a church plant succeed. And so we had this like 18-month period where very few people just wandered in the door. It was almost exclusively folks who we knew and built friendships with outside of church and invited and were interested in the church because they were already close with us and we'd been sharing the gospel with them, or missionally minded Christians. And then this past October, after forever of searching for a good space, got opened the door for us to move into a historic church building here. It's about 100 years old, in Dearborn. It used to be the First Baptist Church of Dearborn. And it's a well-known building in the city. And man, it's like in some ways, floodwater is just like too strong of a term because we're still talking fairly small numbers. But in the first 6 weeks that we were in the new building, we saw about 80 first-time guests come by the building. And that was some combination of just folks in the neighborhood who saw the sign, and our folks have been inviting for a long time, but who were not willing to show up at a funeral home. And so that's been really great in a lot of ways. And the thing that taught me is that, at least in some circumstances, a traditional church worship space in some ways and in some communities, more visitor friendly than non-traditional spaces. I feel like that's not necessarily what we think, but there are folks who are like, it's not really. So I'd meet someone and they're like, oh, what do you do for a living? And I'd say, oh, I'm a pastor. And inevitably the next question was, where's your church? And I'd say, well, we use space at Hal Peterson Funeral Home. And I could tell the look in their eyes was, oh, so you're not really a pastor. It's not really a church. And so, anyways, that's been a huge blessing. Our average attendance has grown from maybe 60 on a Sunday morning to more like 90 on a Sunday morning. And again, it's not just the numbers, but it just shows that more people are willing to kind of walk in the door. Now, what's been challenging is keeping the missional mindset, because now we have folks who are visiting not because they're excited about a church plant, but just because they're looking for a church. And so they're just a totally different kind of group of people who are visiting. And so we're kind of trying to guard against mission drift as a church plant. So I try to say as often as possible, we love this new building, but this is not the end of the journey. We haven't arrived. This is just a tool that's going to help us see the gospel of Jesus go out more broadly in the city. Did you have more questions about buildings? I had one other thought I wanted to share about building.
Yeah, go for it.
So as I've talked to my church planting peers, one thing that I've heard a lot of people talk about and that we've discovered is that there are ways of worshiping in traditional church buildings that are non-traditional ways, sort of creative uses of church buildings that make it a little bit more affordable. So like, for instance, for us, the building we're in, we rent use of the church building, but it's owned by a group of businessmen that want to rent out the building to other tenants as well. And I'm running into a few church planters who've kind of done this. Either they buy a building and rent part of it out to other tenants, or not other church tenants, just like maybe a law firm or something. Or they rent from an owner of a church building who rents it to other tenants as well. And it allows us to be in a traditional church, but at a price tag that's significantly less. Or there's a lot of my church planting peers that are discovering ways to share church buildings with other churches, have 2 or 3 churches using the same building in different creative ways. And so that's been something that's we would not be able to be in a traditional church building budget wise unless we'd kind of found this creative solutions. It's been really helpful.
Yeah, so it sounds like it's in the case of Grace Dearborn, it's you're one of the tenants. At the risk of asking too nosy questions, but it sounds like that's what you're saying, is that the space is also available for other groups to use as well.
That's correct. Yeah.
Yeah. Got it. Yep. Yeah. Well, that's a very good little tidbit for sure. I mean, are folks finding that there's just kind of, and a lot of, as you talk to your church planting peers, is it kind of, there's a lot of kind of church real estate to go around in a way that just kind of, is that kind of what people are finding, or?
It depends on where you're at, right?
Yeah.
Like Dearborn is the fastest growing city in Michigan, which, Michigan's not growing like, some southern states are growing, but as pieces of real, and it's also the youngest city, youngest large city in Michigan. And so what we found is as churches are closing, there are some communities where a church closing means that building is going to sit empty until another church wants it. In Dearborn, a church closes and someone wants to start a daycare in it, or a mosque wants to move in, and so we found a church closes and it's as expensive of a space as any other real estate space in the city is, or more expensive. And so, but I think there are plenty of communities where that's not the case, where a church closes and it's just going to only ever be used by a church.
Yeah. So as we begin to wrap up, there's a couple more things I wanted to ask you about, Jerry, and one of them is the role of outreach via advertising or social media, online media, signage, flyers, those kind of things, kind of like mass communication media. What role has that played in the church thus far?
Yeah, great question. We've tried a few things. Now, the lion's share of our outreach is individual, right? But we did mailers one time. Just contacted a company that sends out mailers to every address in a certain area, and a few people showed up. We recently, when we moved into our new space, did door hangers around that community, and some people showed up. We tried Facebook ads, and there was one family that showed up from the Facebook ads. We of course do signs. We kind of thought about using Google ads a little bit, and they were not ineffective. They didn't open the floodgates of people showing up. What I kind of try to communicate to our folks is I'm a big believer in multiple exposures. I think the number of people who would get a mailer and then go to a church is very, very low. It's not zero, but it's very, very low. But my hope when we did like the door hangers recently is that someone's going to get a door hanger who had just driven by the building and seen our new sign, and also had just talked to their neighbor who knows someone who's been going to our church, and maybe also saw a Facebook ad, right? And so when we did, I think we did 1,500 door hangers in a day. That's 1,500 families for whom this is another exposure to what we're doing. And first, a handful came and showed up. But my hope is that in 6 months, when someone at work says they go to church at Grace and invites them, they'll be like, oh, that's that church that we got the hanger from, In fact, we had folks who showed up when they saw our sign in our new building who, when I sat down and got coffee with him later, said, "Oh, we got your mailer 2 years ago. And we thought about visiting, but we didn't. And then we saw your new sign and we decided to visit." And so I don't think it's a magic bullet, but I do think it's a way of sort of priming people for another encounter later on. Now, I will say mass media ads or like social media ads, they do invite some difficulties. Whenever we've done any Facebook ads, what I'm always discouraged by is the number of negative comments about people who have a chip on their shoulder. They'll make a comment about the church, is the church LGBT friendly? Or, here in Dearborn, we've had folks respond, never Arab folks, but non-Arab folks sort of offended on behalf of the Arab community, saying, why would you start a church in a predominantly Arab community? I don't know. Does that sort of answer your question of how we've used media?
Yeah, no, that's helpful. And he's kind of alluded to it a little bit, but how do you see media and then personal conversations, personal evangelism working together?
Oh, that's a great question.
You were kind of already talking about it, but
Yeah.
in the sense of, you talked about multiple exposures where you're I can't remember if we had pressed the record button, but I was talking about, Jesus saying all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to him, right? And so that includes the things that we think of as very spiritual things like prayer and the Lord's Supper, but it also includes, quote unquote, the little things or the mundane things like door hangers. And it includes, the conversation that maybe it wasn't the person that we were expecting to run into today, but that's the person that the Lord put across our path today. And so just kind of more that side of evangelism, actually bringing the gospel to, I guess, individuals and families. What role has that played? And I guess really the question is, how are there particular rhythms that you have in place in addition to the things you've already talked about, like having the weekly meal, and are there joining the Chamber of Commerce? Are there other things that are part of that emphasis on evangelism?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, let me answer the first part of your question just a little bit more first. Of what is the intersection there of media and advertising and evangelism? I think there could be a danger, right? Like, I think I had a worry when we decided to do this, the mass mailing, that was going to feel to our folks like the way we were going to grow as a church. Like, oh, we just do this mailing and everyone will know, and some people will come. And as if they might outsource their responsibility to be part of inviting folks into church and sharing their faith, being part of the Great Commission. And so I tried really hard to say, no one is going to show up, or practically no one, because of the mailer. But now, whenever you talk to folks about your church or your faith in the community, they know where you go, you can kind of be pretty confident they will have heard of Grace already, or at least had a chance to have heard of it. And then sometimes these can be a really low scare, like a less scary way to first start introducing people to sharing their faith. So like some of the folks who helped us do door hangers, door hangers is not the scariest evangelism you can imagine, but for them, it was the scariest thing they'd ever done as far as sharing their faith. Or for like a Facebook ad, for some folks, pressing repost to their communities, that might be the most they've ever publicly identified with Jesus before. And so it's a good kind of opportunity to get people baby steps. And then you asked about other rhythms in evangelism in our church, in our lives. My family's personal evangelism, I think, can be boiled down to involvement in the community and hospitality. obviously you have to actually open your mouth and share about Jesus for that to be evangelism, but those are the avenues we've looked for. I don't know who said this, but I thought it was a great way of describing kind of how I've engaged. I didn't come up with this phrase, but how I've engaged in evangelism. And I've sort of, as a church planner, tried to think of myself as a professional citizen. Like, what do I spend my day doing? I spend my day trying to be part of the community. So again, Chamber of Commerce, neighborhood association. My wife is really involved in the PTA. If people are getting together in the community, we try to be there and be present and be helpful. Um, and It's been fruitful. Not like, again, not floodgate opening, but it's been fruitful. Catherine's had several families visit the church and some even join from the PTA who weren't previously members of churches. And I don't know if they previously knew Jesus. They do now, which is great. Um, so yeah, I guess that's a little bit of kind of our rhythms.
Yeah, that is a really, I think, powerful way to think about it as a professional citizen. I think that's very striking and helpful. So Jerry, as we close today, guess what is there a word of I guess encouragement that you would offer to those that might be listening today and just I guess maybe are encouraged by what they've heard about how the Lord has been at work in Dearborn, Michigan, and through Grace Church. Is there a word of encouragement that you'd offer to our listeners about how they could kind of put shoe leather to this today as a response to this?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I think a theme of kind of what we've seen in our ministry over the last 4 years is the the long-term effect of planting seeds, right? And so the encouragement I would offer, what I would encourage your listeners to think about is as they think about engaging in the community, as they think about how to share their faith, and to think not in terms of days or weeks, but in years and decades, right? So are there ways that you can engage in your community today that probably won't yield any evangelistic fruit today? Maybe God can do whatever he wants, right? Um, but that you could harvest in the future, or the Lord will harvest through you in the future. And so, because I think a lot of times when we think about evangelism as Christians, we, we want to have a certain amount of like return on investment. I invested time today. I invested energy. I need to know it was successful. And I think what I'd say is if I've kind of taken anything away from the last 4 years, it's been um, the importance of remembering that sometimes engaging in evangelism, engaging community is it's a really long game. It's planting seeds that building a relationship, friendships, trust, serving in such a way that your words become more and more meaningful in your hearers' ears because of the trust you built with them over a long period of time. Now, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't also share the gospel with people you just meet. Praise God, do that also. But don't be discouraged if as you engage in your community, um, it takes a while to get traction.
That's great. Yeah, it's like I think was it First Timothy, Second Timothy. He talks about being like a farmer,
Yeah.
right? So having that farmer mindset.
Well, and to that point, I was with your dad earlier today at the chamber event, And he's well known in the Chamber of Commerce and in the city more broadly. And he was able to share that, that he was a member of our church. And I think that was meaningful to people, like, oh, well, if, Doug Voss is part of the church, because he was trying to figure it out, but he thinks that he had been a member of the chamber longer than anyone else in the room today. There were like 40 people there. And it just shows, like, he was a faithful participator and server in the community, and that means his voice for decades, and that his voice carries more weight now because he planted those seeds and he watered them, and he was careful to keep a good reputation. And so, anyways, that was an encouragement I had.
Yeah, that's great. Well, Jerry, thank you so much for your time today. It's been great to learn more about the church there and what the Lord's doing there, and really appreciate your time today.
Thank you, Daniel. It was a joy.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of the Great Commission Today podcast. If this has been helpful to you, please subscribe, share with your friends, and leave a review.
Jesus came and said, just before he went to heaven, he commanded them, go therefore and make disciples, teaching them to do what I've told you. He said, go therefore and make disciples, and when it's all complete, I'll come for you. He said, lo, I am with you always, go to all the world. Lo, I am with you always, go. He said, go to all the world.